I mean, great that Evan and Paul Whelan are coming home. I think that really what this shows is that a lot of bad guys across the world are worried that Donald Trump is coming back into office, and I think that they're trying to clean house before Trump comes back because they know that when he comes back, it's no more easy streets.
The Republican ticket's vice presidential nominee, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, speaking yesterday about the historic prisoner swap and saying that it happened because of Donald Trump. Trump himself appeared to only have negative things, though, to say about the prisoner swap. In a social media post, he wrote in part, quote, "We never make good deals at anything, but especially prisoner hostage swaps. Our negotiators are always an embarrassment to us." He then went on to claim that as president, he was able to negotiate the release of wrongfully detained Americans in exchange for nothing, before claiming the U.S. had been, quote, extorted yesterday. President Biden was asked yesterday about Donald Trump's criticism of the deal.
President Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now, former president?
Why didn't he do it when he was president?
Yeah, why didn't he do it when he was president? Paul Whelan, specifically, for example, was arrested by Russia during Donald Trump's term in office. And a quick fact check on the former president's claim that his administration never secured the release of Americans without giving up anything in return. Well, for example, in February of 2020, the Trump White House agreed to free 5,000 Taliban prisoners in exchange for 1,000 prisoners. And later that same year, the administration agreed to give up 250 Houthi rebels in exchange for 2 wrongfully detained Americans. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe the former president, John, thinks that there is nothing that he can get out of this, and so he's just going to attack the deal itself. But on a day, obviously, when everybody's celebrating, we all understand there are complications around this deal. We all understand that compromises were made. But it's hard to look at those scenes of the Americans coming home and meeting their families without being able to express some joy, perhaps, at what happened.
Yeah, and Donald Trump simply incapable of doing that. Trump, everything is politics. Everything is about what he can try to turn to his advantage or attack his opponent. And let's remember the dangerous rhetoric we heard from him over the last few months, where he kept saying that only he could make a deal, only he could do it. He would talk to Putin and get it done the first day after he won. That, of course, turned out not to be the case. Joining us now, professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr., and MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle. Mike, we'll start with you. Just your thoughts on what we saw yesterday. A triumph of diplomacy, a triumph for a president who has spent decades in the international arena. And yes, to Caddy's point, there were compromises made. There were hard decisions that had to get done. But at the end of the day, America saw some of its own come home last night.
You know, the contrast that you just raised, talking about Donald Trump's reaction to this, implying that he could have done it better, that we gave away too much. The contrast between the former President Trump and the sitting President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, could not have been more stark than it was yesterday. You had a confident, knowledgeable President of the United States standing up, telling the American public exactly what happened, and then singing happy birthday with a young woman, with his arm around the young woman. Happy birthday. A smile on the president's face. The deep knowledge and relationships that he has with leaders around the world got this done. More than anything else, he got this done. Yeah, the happy birthday to the daughter of one of those released yesterday. Richard, we were just talking about how there was almost a subtext to everything yesterday. The president sort of put a fine point on it occasionally, but really there was this undercurrent of how yesterday reinforced how different the foreign policy approaches of Biden and Trump are.
Absolutely, Jonathan. If I had to sum it up in a phrase, you get the difference between an alliance-first foreign policy, a collaborative foreign policy, which is the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris foreign policy, and an America-first foreign policy, which is Trump. The United States acts unilaterally. In many ways, we withdraw from the world. And that was the subtext. When the president was talking about the power of alliances, that's the great force multiplier of the United States. Think about it. Does Russia have any allies? Answer no. Does China have allies? Answer no. The United States has dozens of allies in Europe, many of whom were involved in this. We have many allies in Asia, probably the Japans, the Australias, and others. That's the great comparative advantage. We have countries willing voluntarily to work with us to tackle regional and global challenges. And that's what you heard the president talking about. He didn't have to mention Donald Trump, but that is the stark contrast in our relationship with the world under, again, what this traditional administration's doing and the outlier approach of Donald Trump.
And Eddie, I mean, that's what the United States has been about since World War II, embracing the world, forming these alliances. Let's get your thoughts here, though, because Donald Trump, we saw it in his 4 years in office already, and he's threatening to even go further in that direction, to be transactional, to be isolationist, and at times just to turn America's back to the world.
Oh, absolutely. He wants to turn his back on that post-World War II consensus. But I think what's really important here, that we keep track of the human element. We saw those families on the tarmac. We saw he lifted his mother up. We saw loved ones hugging each other. We can talk about the geopolitical realities. We could talk about the difficulties of the choice. We could talk about the difference between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. We could talk about how ignorant the latter is in relation to these questions. But what we cannot lose sight of is that these people, these families are together now, and they didn't think they would see their loved ones again. So this is a wonderful, wonderful day.
You know, Jonathan, I think that the reaction from both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance yesterday, the only word that comes to mind is just pathetic. I mean, it is just absolutely pathetic and incredible that they couldn't just say, we're happy that they're home. We're happy that these Americans who were wrongly detained by Vladimir Putin are home. And just leave it at that. They are. I don't understand why they felt they had to attack. I mean, I guess that's who Trump is. And then J.D. Vance seems to be trying really, really hard to be kind of a mini-me and giving credit to Donald Trump for something that he couldn't have been bothered to do when he was in office. And I think in part it's their frustration. They just can't buy a news cycle right now. They have been, and that has to be driving Trump crazy, that Kamala Harris has dominated the news cycle, and he thought he maybe had a little momentum by going crazy and saying offensive things at the NABJ meeting on Wednesday, and then boom, on Thursday, attention is away from him again. Nobody is thinking or talking about Donald Trump. And so maybe that pathetic reaction was just frustration on the part of Trump and Vance that nobody is really paying much attention to them right now.